Hi guys, I'm waiting for most of you to join the live. Hello. I know many people are waiting for this live today to know more about the government reform plan, to ask some questions, because we all have our questions, of course. Our speaker for today is Mike Azar. So some of you know him, some of you don't. He is one of the nerds. Nerd stands for nasty economy requires drastic solution. So they have an amazing page that you should all check out. It's called Finance for Lebanon. He's part of a group that writes articles and shares thoughts on the Lebanese economy. They are super active on Twitter, and I really love following them. Yes, someone's writing here, nerds kick ass. Definitely agree. I've learned a lot from them, in fact. So I'm waiting for more people to tune in. I'm going to tell you a bit how we're going to proceed today. I will try to limit it to 1 hour, guys, really as much as possible. I want to answer all your questions, yet I will try to limit it as much as possible. We're going to start by talking about the government's reform plan, and of course you will be able to ask all your questions, and I'm going to ask mine as well, try to cover everything. Then we're going to talk about the external funding, the IMF, what does it mean for Lebanon. Of course, we're going to talk also about the banking sector, the haircut, and the outlook. And everyone wants to know more and to know about Mike's opinion on the collapse of the Lebanese pound. Also, we will address this topic. Now, I'm going to add Mike to the convo. 1 second. Voilà.
Scheme for the country.
Enough in your audience. A lot of people follow you on Twitter, and I told everyone they should go to www.finance for Lebanon, check all your articles because they are really amazing and very insightful. So thank you for your hard work, Mike. Anyway, since I want to try to limit it to 1 hour, we'll go directly straight to the point. We're going to start basically by covering first, Mike, the government's reform plan. A lot of people have questions regarding that plan. And I want to start by asking you first, what did you see? How did you see this approved reform plan, the latest one? Do you think it's realistic, and could it be the first step towards a healthy economy?
Well, first, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining. I think the first thing we have to remember is that the options are very, very limited. The crisis that Lebanon's facing is so catastrophic and unique in just the multiple types of crises that we're facing that there really is not that much you can do. The solutions are pretty limited. I think this plan, it's very similar to the one that was leaked on April 7. It touches mostly on the key points, and it's a good roadmap for how to get out of the immediate part of the crisis that we're in. And I mean, it's so comprehensive that there's just so many aspects of it to talk about. So, you know, that's not to say that there's no room for improvement or room to ask more questions, because it's not as detailed as it could be. I mean, maybe it's a good document for the average person, an overview of what the plan is. But once you dig into it, there's a lot of questions about the different things that are being proposed and how they would be actually executed. I mean, we can start with
Mike, basically, what changed in your opinion regarding, you told me it's pretty similar to the last one that we saw on 7th April. What's the difference, the main differences between both plans?
Well, there are three main areas of difference, I think. One is in the future financing scheme for the country, right? So we have a need for dollars like any country, and we need a way to bring dollars into the country. That's kind of a fundamental part of the solution in the medium term. What's interesting is that in this plan, they've made a conscious decision to depend a lot more on tourism. So it assumes that there's going to be a lot more tourists coming this year and next year and the year after, which is a little bit questionable because, you know, we're living in the COVID-19 era. Lebanon's going to be going through a lot of social upheaval. So is it really realistic to think that we're going to be getting as many tourists as we've gotten in the past? I mean, on the one hand, we may get some tourists because as the lira gets weaker, it becomes cheaper for tourists to come here. But also, on the other hand, they assume that the capital controls are removed next year. And anybody who studied these kinds of crises knows that capital controls can last 3, 4, 5, 10 years sometimes. So I'm not really sure why they made these two changes. I mean, there may have been pressure to assume that capital controls are removed, because I mean, if they haven't been able to pass a capital controls law, so there's pressure from somewhere to get rid of the capital controls. So if they had to do that, that means they had to assume that dollars are going to be leaving the country through transfers. So they needed to assume something for how dollars come back in. Is that how they came to rely on tourism? That's not a very convincing way to develop an economic program. So that's one thing, and it's one of the main things that I have questions about in this plan. The second is in the way that the bail-in will be done. Before there was a lot less detail. They just said there's going to be a bail-in for shares in a bank. I mean, we call it bank. I mean, we call it haircut, but what's actually being proposed is a little bit different.
It's a makeup haircut. It's a haircut with makeup, let's call it this way.
Well, you at least have some possibility of getting your deposit back. It may not be immediately, it may not be all of it, but at least you have some feasible way to get some of it back, which I think is important. People need to, you know, you can't just take people's money away.
But do you think they were, this time in this plan, they basically removed the idea of having a 50 to 70% haircut on deposit, strict haircut, direct haircut, and they were talking about the clawback on excessive interest paid, right? So do you think this is enough? Is this a better option, knowing that the interest that were earned are in dollars? So is this enough in your opinion?
No, I mean, listen, they've never proposed a haircut. They've always proposed a bail-in. Now, they have proposed potentially clawing back, like you said, the interest, the excess interest, which I think, yes, definitely should be looked into. And to the extent it can be done, it should be done. But then you have just kind of the principle of people's deposit. What do you do with that? Now, before they never gave a number for what percent of the bail-in, you know, would be, what the percentage of it would be. Now what they've said is that they're going to try to have it only affect the top 2%. And they even say we're going to try to have it affect nobody, which is, it's a political statement because there's going to be a bail-in. There's no way around that. I think we need to accept that and think of ways, creative ways to allow people to recover some value over the long term.
But so Mike, on the bail-in front, sorry, I'm going to cut you. In Cyprus, the bank shares are still trading around zero. How do you think people will get their money back in that way?
Well, I mean, whenever you have equity in a company, you could earn a return or you could not earn a return. It just depends on how the economy does, how it improves, how the bank that you have shares in improves. But that's why I was saying we need to think of creative ways. And I think they've tried to do that in this plan, but I don't think they've done it the right way. So they've offered three different, let's say 4 different types of bail-ins, okay? One is a bail-in for shares in the bank, okay? That's standard. One is a bail-in into a fund that will be funded with recovery of stolen money and things like that.
Is that
Also,
even feasible to recover the stolen money? Is that even legal or feasible or doable? Or is it just vague?
well, I think it's difficult. It's feasible if we're serious about it. I don't know what the amounts will be. They say 10 billion is what they assume. I think I read in the plan, but I mean, I don't
Yeah,
think you
10
can really
billion.
put a
I read
number
it
on it.
as well. It's 10
You
billion.
can't, yeah. I mean, this one is a little bit of heck fluff for people, but fine. I mean, a lot of things you can like listen, if there's a fund where there's influential people that have shares in this fund and they're incentivized to pressure the government into recovering these stolen assets, fine. If you recover something, it's only upside. Either way, it's not like there's another option where you can recover more. It's like the options are limited. Do you want, it's better to have the option than not. But I'll come back to that because I have
Okay.
an issue with that specifically. The third option is a bail-in for subordinated debt in the bank. Now, this is an interesting one because if I'm a depositor, I don't know why I would choose a bail-in for equity in the bank when I can do a bail-in for debt in the bank, which gets paid out first. What's my incentive to like make my recovery subordinated to somebody else's? I would just take the debt. But they also say it's debt that could accrue interest, which is a problem because the banks don't really have any way to pay this if it's in dollars. So that's the thing that they don't say, whether the bail-in is in dollars or in lira. In equity, if it's equity in the bank, it's in lira because the banks trade here. But if it's subordinated debt, they don't say that it's in lira, but it has to be because the banks have no way of paying dollar liabilities in the future. Somebody was asking what the
Yeah,
second
exactly.
option
If you
was.
could repeat it, please.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
was that the one where you get bailed into a fund that's funded with the recovery of stolen assets, stolen money, and in Amwal and Manhube. So we said that it's a far-fetched thing. It takes a long time. We can't really predict how much money will come into it.
We're talking about
Really predict how much money will come into it. So I mentioned the subordinated debt. It's one that we need a little bit more details around because remember also, if you keep a lot of debt on the bank's balance sheet, even if it's subordinated debt, you basically don't incentivize because the banks need fresh cash. A bail-in by itself isn't going to be enough because a bail-in
exactly.
that is not cash. So you need to do a bail-in. After the bail-in, you have to recapitalize with fresh money. Tayyib, how are you going to convince investors to put fresh money in the bank and get on the promise of getting dividends when you have potentially a chunk of subordinated debt which gets paid out before dividends from the bailed-in depositors? So maybe they'll limit it. I don't know how it works because there's not really enough details in there to really kind of make a definitive statement about it. But these are just some of the issues to think about. وفي رابع طريقة, there's the fourth bail-in, which is a bail-in. No, sorry, this is not a bail-in, but it's kind of a backdoor bail-in or a bailout where basically they're going to put state-owned companies into a fund, some commercial vehicle, which will be managed properly with an
By
independent
whom?
manager.
Exactly.
Mamnada. We don't know. Again, we don't know. Well, we don't know what the audit procedures are. We don't know, but the intention, based on the language, is that it'll be a properly managed fund. Okay, inshallah. But the problem, and that's fine. Okay, that should be done. That should have been done a long time ago. But the problem is that it says they want to share the revenues, profits from these companies to pay, to transfer them to BDL so that it can pay the remaining certificates of deposit that it has on its liabilities. Basically, people's deposits
Yeah,
that banks have put in BDL. It doesn't
exactly.
say. It doesn't say whether it's dollars or lira. I think it doesn't say. But I think it's in dollars because the text also says that BDL will continue to have foreign currency exposure, meaning that there's still going to be foreign currency liabilities at BDL. هيدي مشكلة كمان لأنه because I don't know if your audience speaks mostly Arabic or English, but I might
Yeah, they
flip
speak
back and
both,
forth.
and you can mix both. They'll be more than happy. And every time I mix
Okay.
languages, so don't be worried, Anne. Don't be worried, sorry.
Okay.
But on that point, Kamina, I have a good question here. She's asking which state-owned company, especially that they said they do not want to privatize for future generation purpose. I've heard it a lot. A lot of people have said it, that it's not fair. And they were talking about the minimal state-owned assets. So from what I read in the plan, the PAMC, they were talking about it.
I don't think the plan lists out the companies, but we know what some of them are. I mean, the big ones are Alpha and Touch.
Would they include those, or they were talking about real estate assets mostly, Anne?
They don't say. They say state-owned companies and real estate. So
Yeah,
there's
and
the
real
real
estate.
estate. Yeah. So the real estate owned by the government. I'm not if, but I'll say potentially Alpha, Touch, Orgero, MEA, Casino, the tobacco company in Citrusmo.
So you really think they would let go of all those companies?
Well, listen, if they put them in a dedicated fund that's managed professionally, that's audited, that's transparent, we all benefit from that because we want to have properly managed, companies, especially as we enter this stage, which, if you look at the numbers in the fiscal projections, it's a stage of pretty severe austerity because the government has no money at all. And so to the extent we can have extra money going into the government's treasury, properly managed, yeah, you don't want more money that's going to be wasted. So that's kind of a condition to everything that I'm saying. And we'll also come back to that. So, but if that money is going to BDL to pay the remaining CDs, it's going to depositors that haven't been bailed in, big depositors. And even though this profit is in lira, not dollars, so I'm not sure how you're going to use lira revenue to pay a dollar liability. Let's put that aside. What you're doing is, in a period of very severe austerity, you're diverting money that the government needs to fund social programs, for example, or to fund capital projects to the wealthiest 2%. And it's not really, socially, it's not going to be acceptable to people. And it's immoral. So if you want to do that, okay, and fine, listen, I've racked my brain to think of ways to give value recovery for some depositors. And the only way that I could think of to do that with state revenue, okay, profits that belong to the taxpayer, is that you condition it on a few things. You do it once the economy is recovered, once there's indicators met that poverty is lower, unemployment is lower, the economy is recovering. And you have to audit all of the accounts that can participate in this to make sure that you're not letting people who earned their wealth, in corrupt ways, also share in more profits that belong to the taxpayer. بس هيدي كله منا موجودة. And actually what we see is that even though this proposal is in here, if you look at the projections of the fiscal budget, the revenues include all of the revenues from the state-owned companies. So it's like they're double counting them. Yeah, they're going to go in this fund. Yeah, they're going to go to the state treasury.
Good
so which
point,
is it?
by the way. Very good point. I haven't noticed.
They don't say. They say state-owned companies and real estate. So
Yeah,
there's
and
the real estate. Yeah. So the real estate owned by the government. I'm not if, but I'll say potentially Alpha, Touch, Orgero, MEA, Casino, the tobacco company in Citrusmo.
So you really think they would let go of all those companies?
Well, listen, if they put them in a dedicated fund that's managed professionally, that's audited, that's transparent, we all benefit from that because we want to have properly managed, companies, especially as we enter this stage, which, if you look at the numbers in the fiscal projections, it's a stage of pretty severe austerity because the government has no money at all. And so to the extent we can have extra money going into the government's treasury, properly managed. Yeah, you don't want more money that's going to be wasted.
Exactly.
So that's kind of a condition to everything that I'm saying, and we'll also come back to that. So, but if that money is going to BDL to pay the remaining CDs, it's going to depositors that haven't been bailed in, big depositors, and even though this profit is in lira, not dollars, so I'm not sure how you're going to use lira revenue to pay a dollar liability. But put that aside, what you're doing is, in a period of very severe austerity, you're diverting money that the government needs to fund social programs, for example, or to fund capital projects to the wealthiest 2%. And it's not really, socially, it's not going to be acceptable to people. And it's immoral. So if you want to do that, okay, and fine, listen, I've racked my brain to think of ways to give value recovery for some depositors. And the only way that I could think of to do that with state revenue, okay, profits that belong to the taxpayer, is that you condition it on a few things. You do it once the economy is recovered, once there's indicators met that poverty is lower, unemployment is lower, the economy is recovering. And you have to audit all of the accounts that can participate in this to make sure that you're not letting people who earned their wealth, in corrupt ways, also share in more profits that belong to the taxpayer. بس هيدي كله منا موجودة. And actually what we see is that even though this proposal is in here, if you look at the projections of the fiscal budget, the revenues include all of the revenues from the state-owned companies. So it's like they're double counting them. Yeah, they're going to go in this fund. Yeah, they're going to go to the state treasury.
Good
so which
point,
is it?
by the way. Very good point. I haven't noticed this, but you're absolutely right. This is where I'm talking about not enough of clarity in this plan. Even the numbers, they don't really add up. The difference, we've seen a difference in numbers from this plan and to the previous plan, and it took me like all night to figure out the new losses of BDL, of the banks. How did they distribute them? We were just talking about it today, me and you. So there's a lot of room also for maneuver. They didn't even say, for example, when we're talking about the clawback on interest, excessive interest, they didn't define what is excessive interest for people. A lot of people don't know. For someone who has like 100,000 in his account and has been earning like a decent interest rate, should this person be stressed? Will it be applied on him? And when you say this is not, they didn't mention a haircut, well, indirectly, this is a haircut. For me, any plan, anything, even a bail-in is an indirect haircut for depositors, right?
I mean, it's definitely a haircut if you define it as a reduction in the value of your deposit. So, but again, it is, I think, an important distinction that there is some possibility of some recovery, except for what you were saying earlier, the clawback of the interest. Yeah, they don't say what the excessive interest is. A lot of the stuff in here needs to be fleshed out, and I don't think they have done that yet. I don't think they've defined what excessive interest is. How do you claw it back? I mean, what if somebody transferred all their money outside? How are you going to claw it back?
On the transferring abroad as well, they said they would be getting money from people who transferred their money abroad. And given there was no official capital control during all 2019, can they really legally do that? Is that feasible for people who transfer during the year 2019? Can they do that?
I mean, one of the most troubling things is that a government that wasn't able to pass a capital controls law and then complains about people transferring money abroad, it's very hard to see how they're going to implement anything in this plan, because the capital control law was actually really not that hard because it's already happening. So you could have done it in a way where it doesn't really affect anybody differently than the way that they're being affected now. So you're right in that it's not fair that, a regular person who transferred their money abroad. But the thing is, after Sauda started and the fake capital controls started, it wasn't people like you and I that were transferring their money abroad. I think if we discover that politically connected people, bank executives, people of that cast of characters were giving themselves a wasta or to their friends to transfer money abroad, then something should be done about that. And I think you're right, it was legal, but we forget that the regulator here and the government have a lot of power because the banks are insolvent. And a regulator can put a lot of pressure on banks and on bank executives and bank shareholders in exceptional times like this. And I think they should, because the money that was transferred abroad is an extra cost that has to be borne by every Lebanese, not just depositors. Because, we talk a lot about depositors and how they're affected by the bank recapitalization and restructuring. But we forget that actually the reason this is important is because it also has an effect on the 50% of Lebanese who don't have bank accounts, because it goes to the heart of the value of the lira. And the way you do the bank recap and restructuring affects the value of the lira, and it affects the kind of economic recovery you're going to have. That affects everybody. So to the extent you have transfers through wastas and they have a negative effect on people, then yeah, the government and the regulator should do everything they can to to claw those back if they can, or to do something about it. I mean, they need to think of creative ways to, to sort that out.
But you're talking those that went out post October 17, and post Saudi, basically.
Yeah, هلا اللي حول مصرياته بالجون او بفبراير, I mean, yeah, what are you going to do? Yeah, you can't do anything about that.
maybe استثمرهم برا، يعني راح استثمرهم، اشترى، ما بعرف، عمل استثمار، حطهم بشي شركة، يعني you never know. ما فيك تلحق الواحد who really went and did other investments abroad, let's say, or he has them with the bank legally. What would you tell the bank to bring them back? And it's not very,
Right.
doesn't seem very logical to me. Berke post October 2017, even though some banks were still allowing, legally, we're still allowing some people to send percentage of their money abroad. Yani. So,
yeah. I mean, one interesting thing there was a version of this plan that was leaked on a draft on April 27.
Yeah.
And in that one, there was a provision in there that said, we're going to audit the accounts of every politically exposed person, every senior government official, their family members, and every account over $1 million. Because we're going to try to find out, we're going to do a forensic audit and find out how that money was earned. And if there was any corruption involved in earning this money, then we're going to refer it to the law enforcement authorities. That would be a way to go after people that transferred their funds last year. That would be a better approach, because then you're going to the people who earned their money corruptly, whether they transferred them or not. Okay, then we don't care. If you earned your money through corrupt means and you were just, and it was through, inflated public, contracts with the public sector or whatever, then that should be done. But interestingly, that was removed in the final draft that was passed by the cabinet. And, nobody's really given us an explanation for that, why that was removed.
Exactly, I agree on that point, and it's much more logical to follow the PEP people actually. Yeah. What I wanted also to say, I noticed another thing. We're all talking about being overbanked, and at several occasions the plan mentioned that Lebanon is overbanked and we need to downsize this sector. On the other hand, the plans approves the issuance of 5 new banking licenses. Okay, we need fresh money. I totally agree, and maybe that's a way to get the fresh money. But isn't it a bit contradicting itself, controversial? And who would be interested today to invest in the Lebanese banking system?
I mean, no doubt we have a banking system that's way too big for this country. And the reason is that you just end up not having anything to do with the money. And so you may end up squandering it, which is exactly what we did. Now, remember, there's a lot of people employed in the banking sector, and these are middle class, upper class people. It's a lot of money in the banking sector. And so if we shrink that sector, that's a lot of unemployed people who are big spenders, and that's going to have an effect on the economy. But that's not to say that's not what needs to happen, because we've shown that this country is too small for the size of the sector that it had. But another angle to that is that when we say we have to shrink the banking sector, also what we're saying is that we have $115 billion in US dollar deposits in the country that we cannot repay. We can't repay them now, and there's no plausible way to repay them in the future. And we've looked at every single possible option that's being proposed in government plan, and other people come up with plans. There is no source of cash for these. Even if the economy recovers and we start exporting and there's a lot of investment in the country, those dollars can't be used to make up depositor losses, because each dollar that comes in is attached itself, it's attached to another liability. So if you divert it to make up depositor losses, you're creating a loss somewhere else. So there's very few sources of money to make that up. So we have to remove those deposits from the system so that the banks can start operating again, because they can't operate with these liabilities that they can't repay. And so we need to figure out a way to have some value recovery, but those deposits have to get taken out of the system. If they're not, then our banks are going to be paralyzed, and you can't have an economic recovery with no banks operating. You're going to have this gradual conversion of these deposits into lira, which is going to have pretty catastrophic effects on the lira exchange rate, on price levels in the country, which will hurt everybody, and it's very aggressive, so it'll hurt lower income people more. Now, in terms of the 5 banking licenses, to be honest, I'm not an expert on bank operations and investments, so I don't really know who would be interested or what opportunities they would have. I mean, the thing is, if you have opportunities for investment, there will be somebody interested in it. So long as you have opportunities for a proper investment, for proper risk-adjusted investment and returns, you'll have banks interested. In the next few years, are we going to have that? I'm not really sure. But if you do, sure, you might be able to. I don't know why they need to do that, unless they're going to delay the restructuring and recapitalization of the existing banks. But you can have multiple banks and still have a small banking sector, right? You just have a lot more small banks. Excuse me. But yeah, I don't really know what to make of that, to be honest.
Yeah, that was, I had this question. I didn't know how to explain it, in fact. Anyway, going to another point now. We know that the government today has a contentious relation, a cold relationship with the ABL and the governor, okay, which made them not negotiate well negotiate together, in fact, to create this plan. Whereas ABL and the governor, the BDL, let's say, they play an important role in this plan. They are 2 main parties in this plan. Don't you think they should sit together and negotiate in order to have a full-fledged plan altogether?
I mean, in a normal country, that's what would be happening, and it wouldn't be issues that are sorted out in the media, which is what's happening now, which is not a good thing for the country, because it paralyzes the decision making, it confuses the public discussion. But we had to remember one thing. ABL represents the bank shareholders, okay? And I think it's important to distinguish between the banks as institutions and the bank shareholders and depositors, right? These are 3 different parties. And when things are going well and the economy is growing and everybody's making money, their incentives are pretty aligned, okay? The bank's doing well, depositors know their deposits are safe, shareholders are earning dividends, whatever. And during times of distress, those interests, they could diverge. And actually, they diverge pretty significantly. So now you have a situation where the interest of the bank as an institution and the depositor are aligned, but the interest of the shareholder is opposed, because the government plan basically says the first loss goes to shareholders of the banks, the first loss of the banks, which is normal. It's what happens in every country before you touch depositors. To the extent you protect shareholders from taking a loss, what that means is that depositors have to take a bigger loss. So if shareholders take the maximum loss, then you're actually maximizing the or you're minimizing the bail-in that the depositors have to take. So ABL represents the bank shareholders, and we have to know that because we have to understand when a group or a party or a person proposes something or comments on something, from what perspective are they coming from? Whose interests are they defending? Okay, because the government plan actually protects the banks. It doesn't liquidate the banks. As institutions, it protects them. It restructures them. So if you think of the bank as a person, it will survive, right? And the depositor doesn't care who's the shareholder of the bank. They just want a bank that's operating properly. So it's interesting that ABL is not, in this case, representing the banks. It's representing the shareholders. So what you have is these three groups: the government, okay, I should say the cabinet specifically, because the parties, the political parties, have different views, and even parties that are the authority behind this cabinet attack this cabinet's plan all the time. So عندك cabinet, عندك BDL, عندك ABL.
Okay.
Ideally, they should be working together. They're not, because they can't. Because so long as the government plan is a total write-off of bank capital, then there's no middle ground. And there's no ground that ABL can give, because you're saying ABL's interests that it represents are being wiped out.
Okay. I have a question here, Mike. Shouldn't management of banks be liable for taking bad decisions and lending one entity throughout all these years?
I mean, I don't know what the law in Lebanon says. Typically, unless you've committed some type of a crime, fraud, gross negligence, something, at least in the US, you're not personally liable, The bank is liable, again, as an institution. But, when they put their money with the central bank, I mean, that's where the loss comes from. We talk a lot about the government defaulting and that being a cause, but and that is a major, source of loss. But the main loss comes from the bank's deposits with the central bank. In what world is a bank depositing money with its central bank considered a credit risk? This is very unusual. So, I don't know what the law says about kind of personal liability of bank management, board of directors, whatever. But, that's a question for depositors to ask a lawyer to see what recourse they have.
And I have another question also, Mike, for you. Today the loss in the financial system mainly originates from poor management and corruption. Okay, I know you just said this point, which resulted in government default. But today in the plan, what we see is that the loss is absorbed basically, mostly by the bank shareholders and the depositors. So do you think this is fair today, in your opinion?
I think there's only so much money to go around, and so somebody has to absorb the loss. And I think, I think the way that this plan does it is it kind of does it in a waterfall, right? Where the government bears its share, okay? And it does that. The consequence of that is the severe austerity that is going to be experienced in this country. But there's no more that it can bear, okay? And then you go down to the bank shareholders, you wipe them out, and then you go down to depositors. There's nowhere else for you to go. So, the options are very limited in that respect.
Okay. Also, in my opinion, I've seen your tweets, and I really, it's not to criticize you, but I really love your work. So just don't think I'm criticizing in my next point.
No, please criticize.
But I felt at the beginning that you were a bit optimistic about the plan, and okay, it's good they are transparent, and I was optimistic on the fact that they're transparent on the losses for once. At least we have an idea. But we've seen over the years our several governments go through proposed plans and going to Paris 1, Paris 2, Paris 3, and said yet all the plans ended up failing because they did not implement any plan. So do you think that today having the same politicians backing this government will make a difference this time, or is it bound to fail? Don't you think you were a bit too optimistic? Because okay, great, we have a plan, but we've always had a plan basically, but never implemented. What's the difference this time?
Well, I've never been optimistic about the implementation of the plan. I was just I thought that the work was good. You know, people put effort into it, and they came up with a plan that you might see in another country going through a similar crisis. And our expectations are so low that something as basic as the government doing its job becomes like, oh wow, you know, so impressed by this. Yeah, I mean, this plan has very little possibility of being implemented. A government, like I said at the start, a government that can't even implement capital controls can't implement this plan.
Yeah, you
Okay.
said it today in the talk,
Yeah.
exactly at the beginning.
So I think this government could do a lot better job of transparency. So I don't think they're doing the best job they can. I mean, look, I went through a laundry list of questions that I have about this plan and how they've come up with it. I mean, most Lebanese don't even know who's involved in preparing this plan. Who are the personalities? Who do you hold accountable for this plan? No, nobody really knows. How much public engagement has there been? Okay. This is something that's going to determine the destiny of this country and of everybody in it. Shouldn't people have a say in what's in it and understand how it affects them? Did the prime minister go on TV and say, this is what we're doing, this is how it affects your life, this is why we have to do it? No, I mean, this is a big failure of this government that they're not doing that. And I think this plan won't be implemented for two reasons. One is that it's always easier for a politician to say the populist things like, no, we're not going to touch deposits, even though we know that there's not really a way around that. You just have to figure out a way to minimize it. And also this affects them too, because who do you think has the top 2% of deposits, you know? So imagine going to a Zaim and telling him, sorry, your deposit is now 60% bailed in. He'll kill you. You know, you can't, you know, how are you going to do that? We know in this country, only some people are held accountable, and there's some people who the law just doesn't touch them. And there are difficult decisions that would be made here, okay, that affect people. You know, the government is going to be slashing its budget. That affects people directly. If you don't have public buy-in of a plan like this, or people understand why they have to sacrifice and what they're sacrificing for, and that somebody's going to be held accountable for getting us here, and that people who were earning, you know, money corruptly off the government treasury are going to be held accountable, then why should they accept any of this? You know, they won't. So there were some points of accountability in this plan, okay, in the April 7 draft. What I think should happen is that everything else in this plan, in terms of economic and financial sector reforms and things like that, should be conditioned on a very strict timeline for meeting milestones for that accountability, okay? You're doing audits of accounts. When? How long is it going to take? Are we going to see the results? How are these being prosecuted? We need to see step by step how this is happening and that these milestones are being met at the same time that this roadmap is being implemented, because anything else is not fair. Because this country didn't go to an economic crisis because of just, you know, boom and bust cycles in any economy, and it happens and whatever. We got here because of waste, corruption, theft, lack of accountability. We didn't need to be here, okay? But here we are. So if the country is expected to sacrifice, then there needs to be something that they're getting ma'abilo. So what is that thing? The accountability is an important part, and there needs to be very immediate progress on that.
There's an important point here. Someone was saying inflation road towards Venezuela, and that we're going to pay the price. Deposits, if deposits will not be touched, basically it's going to be worthless. So we have to, like, some people don't understand that the money is literally gone. Actually, they have difficulty, especially the older generation. That's what I'm feeling. So if we don't go, they're happy still when the politicians go on TV and say, yeah, there's no haircut. And you know, they try to put up makeup to any haircut they're trying to do. That's what I was saying at the beginning. But today, if we don't go through these hard steps Do you think even that we're even going to get an IMF bailout? In my opinion, if there is no reform, like even let's go back to the electricity sector. انه اليوم ال EDL انه طلعت على البلان, they mentioned EDL only in 4 or 5 sentences in the plan. I don't know if you've seen it, but they basically said, you know, it's a sector, it's a problem that has lasted for 30 years. 30 years is huge and has made the country lose a huge amount of money. Yet they only mentioned that they will follow the plan submitted back in 2019. Is this enough? I doubt. And today I was reading an MTV News on MTV News that some from Washington, they had like information from Washington that the IMF bailout wouldn't come unless there is really reforms on the L sector and on smuggling and closing the borders. So do you really think that if there is no real reforms, are we going to see any bailout of IMF happening?
Okay, I think you asked two questions.
Yeah.
On the bail-in and whether the deposits are there or not. I think one problem with this discussion in the country, this public discussion, is that we haven't really approached it with empathy towards people who are going to be affected by this. We talk about it like, yeah, haircut, slash it, you know, forget it. But there are some people affected by this who left the country, left their families, went to some country, slaved away for 20, 30 years to save a few $100,000. And now, towards their retirement, they're being screwed. They did nothing wrong. They put their money in a deposit account, okay? So we need to be kind of very conscious of how this discussion affects people and just be kind of sensitive towards them, okay? Because it's really not fair what's happening to them.
أكيد.
Yeah. وبفتكر هيدي واحد من الاسباب اللي الناس ما فيها
بس
تستوعب
ما في
هالشيء.
choice. اليوم ما عندك choice.
100%. وما فيهم يستوعبوا هالنقطة لأنه it's so hard to do that. It's so hard to accept that your life savings are a big chunk of them gone. But we need to, وحتى ما بس الختيارية والمنو economists. There's economists and bankers who propose plans that are fundamentally don't work because they're premised on the idea that these deposits there's across from them some asset that will recover value in the future. وإذا انطرنا شي 10 سنين فينا نرجع الdeposit. There's no asset across from these liabilities. It's gone. And if you look at and I wrote an article about this because I really tried to think of every possible way to recover these deposits. And there's really just no way. There's very, very, very few ways to recover a little bit of money. وبالليرة ما بالدولار. So
ولا يستر على أي سعر يعني صار الليرة إذا هلا بدنا نحكي على الليرة.
That's a whole thing. Yeah. وهلا بالنسبة ل EDL, yeah, I mean EDL is like one of the biggest problems, economic problems. وهلا شفنا بالفضيحة على كم يوم with the oil imports المضروب. I mean 15 years of importing fuel that doesn't meet the minimum quality standards. Who is watching this? Who's responsible for this? You know, هيدي ببلد تاني, it would be such a massive scandal that it would bring down governments. It would bring down political parties. People would go to jail over it. Who's going to jail over this? Who is being held accountable over this? This is 15 years of potentially $300-400 million a year of theft. Of a reason for why we've never potentially fixed our electricity sector. This is a major, major, major scandal. ما بس هيدي تبع the fuel scandal, but just the fact that we don't have electricity in this country yet. We were bringing billions and billions of dollars every year into this country for years, more money than we knew what to do with. We couldn't build 3 or 4 power plants and give everybody electricity 24/7. I mean, it's something that is just mind-blowing. So yeah, this needs to be resolved. Okay, ما حطوا لك electricity reform plan here. They referred to another one. I don't know enough about the other plan to tell you.
And the other one didn't even mention BOT, and it didn't even mention having international companies coming to the country. So, and today it was clear, yani, from what I read in MTV News, that the IMF wouldn't give any bailout to Lebanon unless we do serious reforms, and especially on the ADL part. يعني do you really think, for example, هلا I want to move a bit كمان على IMF part.
Yeah.
Do you really think that the government would succeed in convincing today the IMF that we need to give us the funds that we need?
Well, when you want to get an IMF loan, there's something you have to demonstrate, right? You have to demonstrate that you can pay back that loan. And you do that by showing that you're implementing reforms that will free up space in the government budget, reduce its cost, that puts you on a sustainable path, not just, in terms of the government budget, but also in terms of the balance of payments. So the foreign currency coming into the country and going out of the country. So it's kind of like a package of reforms that you need to demonstrate and implement. EDL hits at the heart of both of those. لأنه من ناحية, it's a big drain on the government budget. ومن ناحية تانية, it's a big drain on the balance of payments because we buy fuel for EDL in dollars. هلا يمكن ما تقدر تنزل fuel imports كتير لأنه even if you fix it on the government side, you still need to import fuel. You could do mass transit, you could do more efficient power plants to kind of you could do renewable energy. أكيد you have to do that. A comprehensive plan. And I don't know what's in the 2018 plan that was referred to in the government plan, the electricity reform plan. But I can tell you one of the main problems and challenges we're going to face in reforming the electricity sector. هلا في شغلات فينا نبلش فيها دغري, right? Corporatizing EDL, which is not privatizing, corporatizing, basically having a corporate structure of management, board of directors, independent management in EDL, accountability, oversight, كل هالشغلات اللي الحوكمة يعني. But then you need investment in infrastructure. Well, investment من وين بدها تجي? It's fundamentally a foreign currency investment. You need dollars to come in so you can build new power plants, so you can modernize your transmission and your grid. هلا بالخطة تبع الحكومة, they rely on SED funding to come in 2022, I think.
كمان is it feasible? Is it still
Yeah.
on the plan? Will they give it? We don't even know يعني.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know, but there is so few sources of money, of external money, that you basically have to underpin the plan through some source of external funding. And if it's not these, then what can you base your plan on? But you need it. You need financing. It's got to come from somewhere.
أكيد.
هلا الانترستينج thing is that بالخطة اللي طلعت من كام يوم, if you compare it to the leaked one from April 7, they're assuming 500 million more from SED. So they're relying even more on it. But you need it. You need a source of infrastructure investment. So it's got to come from somewhere. هلا they've assumed SED. If it doesn't come, they got to find another place. But even that has conditions. كله عنده conditions. ما حدا بيجي بيعطيك مصاري with no conditions. IMF's going to have conditions. With SED, you need to demonstrate what the project is, what the procurement is, why this project is needed, the impact of it, and then it's financed on a project-by-project basis. IMF is disbursements over time as soon as you're meeting milestones of reform and economic metrics. But
so
because
how long that? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Continue on your idea.
So because EDL goes to the heart of both of these programs, really, there needs to be immediate reform of EDL. لازم نبلش بمحل ما فينا نبلش. And then once the sector is kind of governed a little bit better, the next challenge will be, how do we get financing? And what actually does a proper electricity sector for the year 2020 and beyond look like? Do we just build a few new gas-fired power plants, import LNG? What role does renewable energy play? يعني هيدي كلها ما فيها تكون بالخطة لأنه هيدي بدك فريق of finance, of energy, of public policy professionals to work on it. So, I don't know if the 2018 plan is good enough. A lot of people have complaints about it. But again, we have so much talent in this country. Let's do a public engagement process to get ideas and really listen to people with ideas and to do a proper electricity sector reform. We're starting, in a way, we have a good opportunity because we're starting from scratch. معنا legacy power sector and خلاص ما فينا بقى نحيد عنها. We're basically building one from scratch. So let's do it right the first time.
Okay. And how long usually it takes to reach an agreement with the IMF? Do you have any idea?
With other countries, it's taken 3 to 9 months. There's a lot of pressure on the IMF because of COVID-19. There's a lot of countries coming to ask for programs. So, it may be on the longer end. وتذكر هن يمكن ما يقبلوا الخطة مثل ما نحن عم نقترحها. They may make changes. They most likely will make changes because if you look at the forecasts in there, then they might find that they're unrealistic for the same reasons that I described earlier. They might say, you're not going to get that many tourists this year, sorry, or next year. So you need to rework this. So there'll be some negotiation. There'll be, back and forth. Some things will change. And by then, I think الخطة بدها تتحول بعد ما once the IMF agrees to it. الخطة بدها تتحول لوينين, right? Because you need parliament to pass a lot of these things. That's going to take some time. I mean, we look at this plan and it's easy to see, okay, let's do this. But we forget that implementation for, something that could be one line in the plan could take, 100 pages of legislation and a team of people just to figure out how to do it and what are the effects of it and what's the timing of doing it. I mean, you need a whole commission just to sort out the banking sector restructuring. You need a whole commission to do a nationwide debt workout. قديش في ناس بلبنان عندها دين بالدولار، اوكي؟ قرض بيت بالدولار. إذا حولت if we de-dollarize يعني حولت الاقتصاد على اقتصاد أكتريته بالليرة وإذا عملت devaluation للليرة ما فيك تخلي الدين بالدولار مثل ما هو.
أكيد لا، ما حدا بيقدر يدفع.
سو بدك شو تكحشي 50,000 واحد من بيته لأنه ما بقى بيقدر يدفع القرض تبعه؟ المفروض يلي بيصير إنه في عندي commission and بيعملوا basically like a nationwide amendment of contracts, of loan contracts, to amend a few key provisions to be consistent with the way that the economy is going and some of the other economic decisions that we're making. These all are things that have to be done, and it's a humongous task. The electricity sector reform is a big task. The industry-specific reforms. You have to do reforms to support agriculture and the knowledge economy, import substitution, all that stuff. يعني هلا إذا بتطلع على الخطة it's basically Wikipedia copy paste. كل ما يطلع واحد بيقول حطوا هيك بالخطة, they just copy it and put it in there. It's not really anything. It's just, it's هيك ideas that are like, okay, we'll look into this, we'll look into that. But you need like whole teams of people to study these things. And the timing of these things is so important. When you do them, at what stages you do them. ما في كيف يعني تحط عامل كل هالشغلات بنفس الوقت.
بس بذات الوقت هلا نحن محشورين بالوقت اليوم. لا مايك، يعني انه اليوم الوقت عم بيلعب ضدنا كمان. The more we're taking time يعني the more we're seeing inflation و devaluation و the things are going out of control. يعني we need external financing in my opinion à SAP.
Yeah. So
yes,
it may be based on هلا اكيد في near term solutions, في medium term, في long term، وهيك بتتقسم وبعدين بتعرفي كيف تشتغلي. هلا what are the conditions to getting the immediate external financing? We'll find out, okay? We'll find out from the IMF because that's our immediate source of financing. ما في محل تاني. So we'll see what conditions they have and what we need to do. Based on those conditions, we could see يعني كيف فينا نخفف الوجع على العالم. For example, if they say we need to devalue immediately, you do that, but you got to do some things, come in at the same time, because a lot of people are going to be hurt by that.
Yeah. هلا كمان لاحظت شيء that most economic experts حتى nerds يعني in general are excluding politics a bit يعني whenever they have an analysis they exclude it شوي, whereas the US is warning that certain parties have a I don't want to name يعني I don't want to go into the political side, but certain parties have a parallel economy in Lebanon, and that IMF aid will not come easily. Since the US كمان عندها the biggest say in the IMF, is it possible to ignore politics at that stage? Do you think? إنه في كتير ناس بيقولوا إنه IMF is the US is putting pressure on this parallel يعني on this certain on those certain parties. That's mainly the condition. What do you think about that? في كمان تقول لي ما بدي جاوب يعني.
لا. Listen, the nerds don't avoid politics, بس نحن we're economists and bankers. So ما نحل geopolitical problems بلبنان, بس كلياتنا
But it's
فهمانين شو
linked.
هي.
يعني
Yeah,
it's
listen,
linked. ما
there's
فينا
it is linked, بس إذا بتعطيني خطة اقتصادية بتقولي لي حلل لي إياها, ما فيني أقول لك well geopolitics روح كبها. You know, I told you from the start, so long as we have the political system we have today, ولا حل رح يشتغل, okay? Yeah, we have warlords in this country, we have oligarchs, we have حزب الله. هدول كلياتهم, they affect the way that you can, you know, you're not going to be able to have a normal standard, liberal democracy with a, market economy. لأنه بنعرف في عنا 100 شغلة عم بتعرق لنا إياها. Yeah, we know إنه أمريكا رح يكون عندها issues probably with supporting an IMF program لأنه حزب الله موجود بلبنان. ما لنا سر هيدي يعني نحن ما لنا فهمانين هالشيء. I don't know. I don't talk to the IMF to know to what extent, or I don't talk to the whatever relevant agency it is in the U.S. that decides how the U.S. Treasury, I guess, that decides how the U.S. votes on these things on its board and the IMF. Okay, if they tell us you can't get an IMF program and they manage to stop other countries, and the U.S. can't veto a program, they can vote against it, but the program can still go through. Yeah, that's a problem. I mean, the fact that we have تهريب, that's a problem. يعني هاي الشغلات كلها مشاكل. أنا ما بعرف كيف بدي أحلها أنا, يعني أنا I can't حل
لا
كل
اكيد ما عم
القصص
بطلب منك تحلها, بس هيك just your opinion لانه a lot of people that talk that that's a big elephant in the room and that's the main يعني the main problem that we have today يعني.
It's a big problem. It's not the only political problem we face. It is a problem, but it's not the only one. إذا ما كان في, listen, I'll take even a step further, okay? إذا ما كان في سياسة الزعماء وهالشغلات not free and fair elections وما بعرف شو, وكان في بس حزب الله, we would have a problem. إذا ما كان في حزب الله وكان عنا بس النظام اللي موجود تبع الزعماء, we would also have a problem. So it's the entire system that we have كله على بعضه. It is a problem, and I think
Mike, بدي أقطعك لأنه بركي it's gonna stop. I have to call you back. I will call you back لأنه after 1 hour Instagram stops, so I will call you back for the remaining session. Okay? Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.